Good morning to all of you. What a beautiful array of Easter bonnets and tulips and wonderful music and a homecoming welcome to the Reverends Barbara and Bob. Our rocks are back. We are so glad to have you. Boy, talk about the Easter message right here in front of us, right? I invite you all to shift gears to that small, quiet place, however you define it, and let's go within. I know there is an incredible life force, Father, Mother, Spirit, God, right here in front of us, the order behind the cosmos. I know this life force to be all providing, all renewing, and I give thanks for the message of the season. Come together to make our time special. Those in On this Easter morning, we rejoice and are glad for our Christian friends who celebrate the holiest of holy days, gathering together to commemorate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Around the globe, pipe organs resonate with uplifting music as choirs and John and Paul sing hosannas and alleluias. There's an air of jubilation, a triumph over death, a day shaped by we are invited to learn from our Christian family and friends, or our Christian upbringing. Today, we be slightly different, a little newer, or less defined. Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor, recently interviewed on Krista Tippett's On Being, explained it this way. I am a Christian, and this is the context in which I experience God. For me, it is a beautiful tradition, and I believe it can lead me to God. But it is a tradition that works for people who have a specific set of experiences. And there are equally valid traditions that can lead people in different ways, people who experience the world differently, leading them to the same God, who is too big to be captured in any particular aspect. Where does this leave all of us on this important Christian holiday? Reverend John wrote about it this week when he talked about the Christ consciousness in each of us and the transformative power inherent therein. A shift often so slight, but with the ability to move us toward the light. Further in her interview, Reverend Taylor was asked, "What is saving your life right now?" She replied, "It's the right now. If I can stay right now, I can find more joy. There is something every day that is worth staying alive for. I try to stay in the present as best I can and am amazed at life as it unfolds every day and is more than just scenery as I rush from here to there. It's the real deal." Pope John Paul II agreed when he said in a speech in Australia in 1986 that in a true sense, joy is the keynote of the Christian message. My wish is that the Christian message may bring joy to all who open their hearts to it. He continued, I wish for joy to children, joy to parents, joy to families and to friends, joy to workers and scholars, joy to the sick and to the elderly, joy to all humanity. Faith is our source of joy. And then the Pope said, "Do not abandon yourselves to despair. We are the Easter people, and Alleluia is our song." These words bring the message of this Easter morning together for me, and its message of triumph, transformation, the promise of rebirth, and the awareness that faith, however you define it, is our source of joy. How remarkable it would be if we intentionally infused our life with the triumphant jubilation of Easter. If even in times of despair or challenge or darkness, we consciously noticed the present joys, small though they might be, how differently our lives might become, transformed this very day by remembering that, like our Christian friends, we are the Easter people, and Alleluia is our song. And so it is. And because I love saying those words of the Pope, instead of repeating the affirmation in the printed program, why don't you repeat his words after me? We are the Easter people.
We are the Easter people.
And Alleluia is our song.
And Alleluia is our song.
And so it is.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. It's funny, people just don't wear hats anymore, do they? Like I've told Barbara, she's done everything but have something alive in a cage on her head. So I was thinking this might be the year. But no. We can only hope. It gives us something to anticipate. Welcome, happy Easter, happy many other things. And so, spoiler alert, John kind of already said this, of what the whole crux of today is about for me, and some different ways we will look at it, is that you can die to every day and be renewed and, in a sense, resurrected in what you're doing today. The past is yesterday and the days before, and today you can always start anew. And I know as human beings, we convince ourselves that that isn't true. That the baggage that we carry sometimes is so intense and so heavy that the thought of renewing or resurrecting to a new way of being can seem so beyond the pale, so beyond what is possible for us. But I think that we can all look into our own histories and know that at different times, and maybe we have to go way back, that we have all carried heavy loads that we, to a certain extent, have challenged ourselves and have been inspired through many different ways to lay it down. So, as we go into this message, to realize that whatever you're carrying today, you can lay it down. It's a new day. And if you can use the symbolism of Easter and the other observances that we have at this time of year, great. And that we'll go over those observances a little bit as a little inspiration of how it can be done. But know that you have the power and presence of Spirit and the divine right within you right now. You don't need anything else. You don't need to go anywhere else. You don't need to find anything. You don't need to go to a new class. You don't need to pray to anything or light a candle or throw salt over your shoulder. You have everything you need right now. And I'm hoping as we kind of settle in today that, so here's my goal today. If you can believe that just a little bit more today when you leave here than when you came in, my job is complete. Just a little bit more. Move it just a little bit forward a little bit, that you believe that you have power and presence to make a shift. Again, just move a little bit. And we've done our work today. So it's interesting how so many things come together here. Light on the Mountains is part of a larger organization, Centers for Spiritual Living. And it is a faith community that's a bit different in that we don't have, people say, well, who's your Jesus? Who's your prophet? And we don't have one. And we're not looking for one either. We are a teacher of a spiritual philosophy that I believe that parts can be accepted or used by everyone, regardless of if you have your main spiritual belief or religion, that you can borrow a little bit from us. And our founding philosopher, Ernest Holmes, says, look at what we have, take what works for you and throw everything else away. Where have you heard that in religion before? Like, you don't like it? Okay, don't. Don't pay attention to it. So my hope, and we do have people through the valley that have primary observances at other churches and synagogues that come for a little bit of something to add on to what they do, and that's great. So take in what you hear today and embody what sounds good and throw everything away, basically. And it was Ernest Holmes' desire at first when he kind of drew this philosophy together, is that his vision was to have a place of education where people of different faiths could come together and talk about their similarities rather than their differences. I think that's a pretty significant thing, essentially since he was starting this in the early 1920s and 30s. At that time to say, can we come and talk about what we have in common instead of, oh, I believe this, oh, I believe that. It says, let's get to the core. Where can we find common ground here? And that's also what I like to do. How can we come to common ground? Because we all have so many different beliefs and desires and different things, but how can we come together and talk about what we all find sacred and holy? I think that's a great goal. And this is an amazing time of year to do this. So we have Easter. What some of you probably know is that we are also in the midst of Passover, which is a 7-day Jewish observance. We have right now Ramadan, which is a month that is sacred to Muslims. And what's, of course, kind of an interesting irony as we say we celebrate Easter, Easter was a pagan holiday before the Christian era. So, it's funny how, so as you see the little eggs here, don't eat the kids' candy, I'm just telling you. If there's any left over, you're going to have it. We allow the kids to be fully sugar inebriated today, and there's plenty of opportunities here. But these things have absolutely nothing to do with the Christian story of resurrection, a little bit more with kind of the pagan version of it. So all of these things come together to give us the opportunity to say, what's in common here? And part of what we'll talk about today is this common idea through these different stories, through the Easter story, through the Passover story, of leaving the past behind and moving forward. Again, even though your belief has maybe been that it's not possible, but these stories inspire us that it is possible. And of course, in Central Spiritual Living, we were part of this tradition that's called New Thought. And we look at these stories, again, more metaphorically. And I'm not saying you have to always look at it this way, that the core of the Jewish faith and the Christian faith may be so dear to you that you see things very literally and you see the resurrection as someone coming out of their grave, and that may be possible. But again, we talk about the larger metaphors of these stories to inspire us to change our lives. And so when we speak of Jesus in the New Thought tradition, we often refer to him as what we say is the great example as opposed to the great exception. Meaning, if you think of him as the great exception, you think that his story is for us to observe and possibly learn from. But when we see him as a great example, we're seeing that he's modeling transformation for us. And there's a bit of a difference there. And so when we look at a couple of passages in the New Testament, there was one spot when he was reported to have performed a miracle, and he just said, and they're like, oh my gosh, this was great. And he says, but even greater things you can do. This is just a model of how this works, that you go within yourselves, and as he also said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. In other words, that consciousness of the Christ, which is the connection to all that is and the divine, is within you. So again, he's just like, just do what I do. You can do it already, but you might need a little bit of modeling here, someone else to take the first few steps. So for me, that is the larger thing of this story, is to say it's not about being something that we are observing, it's about something that we can embody within that. And my other understanding of this story in the whole New Testament is, it's so funny that if you were raised Christian, and your particular church probably thought that the way that they taught Christianity was the way, didn't they? But I came across a statistic this week that was kind of blew me away. It said that in the United States, there are approximately 200 different denominations within Christianity, but within the world, there are 45,000. I thought, wow. So, and I'm not saying this to disparage anyone. What I'm saying is that people are finding their own path within it. That it's not like, well, this group is wrong, this one's kind of semi-right, this one is right on Tuesdays, but this one has really got it all wrong. It's saying that there are different ways that you can examine this and embody it. And I think that is a good thing. I think that's a positive thing. So when I look at his message, and as we do in the Easter story, with all these things of people thinking, well, this is what I believe, this is what is taught, I boil it down to two things. I believe his message was unconditional love and unconditional non-judgmentalism. So if you say you want to have the Christ consciousness come alive within you, those are the two things. So as you go through your day, are you modeling unconditional love and unconditional non-judgmentalness? Now, this doesn't mean that you have to, as I call spiritual bypass, like, oh, this thing is exploding and my house is on fire and, oh, I'm just loving the event. That's not what I'm talking about. Or I'm not going to judge that as ruining my life with my new couch I just bought that I spent $5,000 on. It's not that at all. It's this understanding that there is a greater presence within all things, even when they're difficult. And that it's not saying that we can just stand by and have things happen in the world just as they happen. But at the same time, as also in the New Testament says, to challenge us to have the same mind as the Christ, meaning that even as we are making our decisions, even as we're trying to make the world a better place, even as we are going to vote, any things that we do, choices that we make, that we know that we are not, in a sense, looking at that which we don't like and have to cut it off, get rid of it, and kill it, that we are seeing that there is a greater presence within it that we can, in a sense, allow healing to come through. So it's like your arm. If you have a cut, you don't cut off the arm, you allow it to heal. And I think that's what's up for us in the world today. It's not to cut off the things that we don't like, and there's plenty of invitation to do that. Of, well, they're wrong, what are they doing, who are they voting for, get rid of them. Instead, say, well, how can we begin healing at our core? How can we meet each other at that spot of unconditional love and unconditional non-judgmentalness? That's where you start, and even knowing that there can be great disagreement. So, the stories particularly of Jesus last week and of Passover are amazing stories. And they step by step tell us what to do, in a sense, in our own progress of being ready to lay our burdens down. And it's so interesting how, as humans, seems to be our natural tendency to judge things. We judge things good and bad all the time, don't we? We kind of judge people as we come here. Just like, oh, a little too much going on that hat this year, is there? You know what I mean? Or, you know, they brought that for the potluck last time and it wasn't good. But, you know, we do that, and it's kind of like, we do that. In fact, I was watching this little TikTok yesterday, and this Southern guy, he has this thing talking about the perils of the covered dish going to the church potluck on Easter. There's rules I didn't even know about it, and you will be judged. I just found that so fun and so funny. But these stories teach us, in a sense, to go deeper in spite of what we see. And when we are called for transformation and healing, there's a part of us that sense that we can be more of ourselves. So it's not getting rid of anything. It's like putting extra RAM on your computer. You're making it bigger. You're recognizing that there's something more here that we can do, that it wasn't just about getting something or getting rid of something. So last week was Palm Sunday, and we talked about a little bit. It started this Easter week for Jesus, and try to give some of the basics for those of you who weren't raised like an hour of catechism every day like I was when I grew up, that it was a time that he was seen as a political leader by many people. And there was this sense that they were on the verge of something really great and possibly even overthrowing the government, and he was the guy. And they were greeting him like with a hero's welcome in Jerusalem. And the irony of that is that, let's admit it, the week went downhill from there for him. So on one hand, as we judge our lives, we could be in a situation that we think we've got it all covered and that we have it all handled. Haven't we all been under that illusion at different times? I'm good. I've got everything handled, everything covered. It's all working just the way that it should. I've got everything I've ever worked for. If you've got kids, the kids are great. You got grandkids, they're just enough. Here, just enough, and at home, just enough. It's like you got everything just working out just fine. And life has a way of transitioning, and suddenly it's not that way anymore. Whereas it's interesting as we look at the Passover story. That story is basically about an enslaved people, the Jews in Egypt, and gaining their freedom. So let's look at the beginning of that story. I would imagine their belief is they're never going to get out of this. That the enslavement is permanent. That there's this idea of, if only if kind of thing. But the odds were against them. Armies and powerful people to keep them exactly where they were. So it's interesting as you start these stories, one in we're never going to get out of this, and the other, things couldn't be greater, but yet the stories moved on and went to different places. So again, don't, in a sense, judge your life where it is now. Both what we judge as good or bad, it is continually moving forward, and we always have the opportunity to be renewed. So what's interesting with the Passover story, of course, as humans, we want some quick action, don't we, once it starts changing? So it's such a long story, we could spend literally hours, and we've just got too much food to get to, so we're not going to do that. But basically, they're being released. And would you think that suddenly, you got the phone call, you got the job, or you got the thing, or the good things happening that you never thought possible, that you're basically just going to get in your car and go, right? It's like, it's here. What's frustrating about this story, of course, their promise was to reach a promised land. A place of enslavement to a promised land, which, like all of us, a place where things aren't going too well sometimes, to a place that is better. That's basically what it is. And so you would think let's just get going. Let's go to where we're going to go. And of course, the story metaphorically tells us that they spent 40 years in the desert. That's a long time to wait for what is you thought we're going to be there by next Tuesday. No, and it's funny, a few years ago I did a little search on Google Maps, and I thought, how long would it take to walk from Egypt to, say, Jerusalem? And it said 6 days, and I thought, boy, were they lost. They must have had some guy with the map or something. It's like, they were, how could you have 2 million people in the desert like this thing, and it's supposed to take 6 days, and it takes 40 years? But it's a metaphor. As I have told people before, 40 stands for as long as it takes. So in our own lives, as we make a journey from something from our past, or that we're growing, or that we've laid our burdens down, our emotional burdens, and we start that journey, and it's usually not just you're here and you're there. The way that transformation happens is always in process. Sometimes that process is 10 seconds. I like those. And sometimes we think, I'm never going to get there. And let's look at process in Jesus' story in the last week. One thing that was very interesting, and as he is the night of his Last Supper, where the story tells us that he was arrested and he's waiting to be arrested in the garden, and he has a prayer. And basically the prayer is, can you take this chalice from me? Meaning, do we really have to do this? Is there any way to avoid this? I mean, it's like, I'm up for it, but it seems like this is a bit extreme. And haven't we all done that too? It's just like, I know I have to make that phone call and tell someone something that neither of us are going to want to hear, but I have to make that phone call. And knowing, haven't you ever had a conversation that you knew that it was at a life-changing point of your life that as soon as you said it, your life was going to be different? Haven't we all done that? And I can remember one of the most significant ones, and I'm not going to go into the story, and I had to, in a sense, start with telling a particular person. And I remember just thinking is that all I have to do is be quiet, and my life won't change. And that's kind of the biggest fallacy in the world, isn't it? Because it would come out sooner or later. But still, there was this idea, okay, I can let the chalice go away from me here. I'll just pretend nothing is happening in our lives, and I'll just be quiet. And we won't have to go through this whole mess. Well, that's not the way that it unfolded. Truth is almost like that, the Pandora's box. Once you open it, it's out. There's no stuffing it back in. So that shows you, too, in our transformations, there's a part of us that think that I can just pull back a little bit. But I think as you've all figured out in your lives, especially I'm talking about the big transformations, resurrection, big transformation, not the I'm getting a new hat transformation. It's like the big transformations that you have to be all in. That you might have a prayer like, is this really necessary to this extent? And the answer to that prayer, we always answer to ourselves. It goes, no, actually, there's no passing this by. It's part of this process, whether it's 4 seconds or 40 years. There is a process here that is beginning. And when we are in these big processes of our lives, it can seem like those 40 years in the desert. There's time there are big shifts and changes and transformations, and I've experienced this, and I'm sure many of you have, where everything is changing and it appeared like you lost everything. Haven't we all had times of just such great loss? It's just like last week was completely different, and look what just happened. And sometimes transformation shows up like that. And again, it's not bad karma. It's not because you did something negative to the universe. It's part of the walk in the desert sometimes. Why? I don't know. But it seems like there has to be that releasing and letting go and closing the door on what we have been doing and who we have been. And to take a step forward in a new state of consciousness to say, I'm truly on board. Yeah, so if you've ever done prayers and set intentions for intense transformation in your change, to be honest with yourself, and I'm not asking you to share with your neighbor, were you holding anything back? Were you like, yeah, change it all, but I'm really comfortable with this right here. Let me just put a little, thing around here. Don't touch that. Touch anything else. But it's not until you say, and it's not that you have to give up everything, but it's until you can honestly say, in this transformation that is happening today, or this resurrection, I am fully willing to let everything, to die to everything that came before. And that's a big, big step to take. It's not that it's all going to go away, but to say that I release attachment to the way that was before, and I'm ready, in a sense, for my walk in the desert to move forward to whatever that will be. And there's a couple things that in Jesus' story, the Easter story, that has always really been something I've just taken in to think about. And again, to think about the story a little bit larger. So in my Catholic upbringing, we were taught that he, of course, died on Friday, and that as it said in the Nicene Creed, it said, he descended into hell for 3 days before resurrection. And of course, it's funny, as a kid, I thought, well, that sounds awfully unfair after all that. But metaphorically, it means that if you truly are willing to give yourself over to transformation, it's saying, I'm ready to visit everything within me that doesn't look like transformation. I'm willing to go to those spots that I've tried to convince myself that aren't there and look it right in the face and say, it's time to heal. So that descent was not about punishment. It was about, let's really look at what's been lurking around there. Let's see what was there. Let's be honest, finally, that before we can, in a sense, have a resurrection moment, we have to make peace with everything. And for me, that's what happened for him in that story. So transformations are really kind of amazing and almost mercurial. I think as human beings, we like to set the terms of our own transformation. Good luck with that. Once you've let the cat out of the bag, things have a way of changing. I also find it interesting reading the gospel accounts of Jesus post-resurrection. He wasn't the same old guy, basically. He was seen as a shapeshifter, someone who could be present in more than one place at once. Was just almost like a supernatural being. And again, I would not say what historically happened or not, but that is, in a sense, the picture that's shown. When I look at this time of year, I always go to a resource that I love, Bishop Shelby Spong. He was an Episcopal bishop for many years, an author. He even was a keynote speaker at a Central Spiritual Living Conference several years ago. And he took kind of a larger view of this story. In fact, the book that I have he wrote is called Resurrection, Truth or Fiction, or Truth or Myth, or something like that. And I like his take on it. And he said, so first of all, when we look at anything spiritually in stories and scriptures or anything, it's all meant to be mysterious. As human beings who exist in the 21st century, we want an Excel spreadsheet. We want to know exactly how it happened. We want names, dates, times, and references to call. These larger-than-life stories don't have that. They're asking you to go in to a deeper spot and ask yourself, what do you get from these stories? And his conclusion I just really loved. He said, I have no idea if a beat-up and battered body actually got up and walked out of a grave. But he said, I do know that everyone there involved had an experience of Jesus on some level. He said, why else, when he was put to death, everyone run for the hills because they were next, and something brought them together to start a movement that would change the world. So he said that to him, to think that a body would be resurrected is thinking too small. He saw it as something much bigger than that, that changed people's lives inwardly. And so I sit with that. And as we come to the end here, I just want to read a couple paragraphs from Shelby Spong that I just loved. And both these paragraphs embody the two things that I personally believe in Christianity: unconditional love and unconditional non-judgmentalness. He says, ultimately, the resurrection is a call to universalism. Go to all the world. Go beyond the boundaries of your fears. Go to those you have defined as unclean, unworthy, unsaved, and unbaptized. Go to those you have reduced to being the object of your prejudices. Go to those who are different. Go to the rejected of the world and teach them what I have taught you, namely that God is love, and that love embraces all that God has made, that love has no boundaries, that love rejects no one, and that love is the essence of our gospel. Resurrection means that we live in God and participate in its oneness. It means no one stands outside the love of Spirit. It means that we are part of God and God is part of us. It means that life in God is eternal because God is eternal. That is the gospel that Matthew proclaims. The gospel that Matthew's Jesus bids us to preach. It is a gospel to be lived, not just to be repeated, because God is not a noun that demands to be defined. God is a verb that invites us to live, to love, and to be. So let's just have a quiet moment. So let us this morning open our hearts and minds to these stories of the season and simply be receptive. Let us not judge and just allow these stories to wash over us, to affect the parts of us that need to be affected, to use them as means to allow us to leave behind and unburden ourselves in ways that we may have not have thought possible. Let us just be open. Let us be open to the unconditional love of the divine, and let us be open to our expressing unconditional love in all circumstances. And know that even though we make decisions in our life, we know that at the heart of all is the power and presence of Spirit of God. And that we recognize that in all things. So we give thanks for this. We give thanks for the power and presence of renewal. And in any prayer or an intention, the power in them is to let them go. We release them into the universe, into the ethers, into whatever you think you would release something into. And let Spirit has its way. And we know that as it unfolds, it is perfect. So we just come to that conclusion of release and say together, and so it is.